Greetings everyone, we're back again to cover another paper. It's paper number 107, titled The Seven Great Passovers of the Bible. The short synopsis here: this work explains the sequence of the seven great Passovers of the Bible and their meaning in the build-up to the coming of Messiah in the Incarnation. The forerunners to the Passover are explained, and then the meaning behind the Passovers in the Exodus, the fall of Jericho, and with Gideon, Hezekiah, Josiah, Ezra, and finally Messiah are discussed. The framework of the Passovers is explained in relation to the life of a man. The Jubilee system and the parables in Genesis 2:9, Zechariah 4:3-6, Luke 3:7-14 are also explained. The years of the tree from Luke 13:6-9 take on a much fuller meaning or significance from this work. Now we'll hand over to Wade and we'll discuss the first subheading here is the forerunner of the Passover. Wade, would you like to expand on the beginning?
Yes, right. This paper deals with the sequence of the seven great Passovers. The Passovers not isolated to Christ. Christ was actually the seventh of the great Passovers of the Bible. But there was a forerunner which occurs in Genesis 18:19 when the three Elohim went down and they spoke with Abraham. And then they went on to Lot at Sodom. And there was, in fact, a similar event of eating lamb and unleavened bread before Lot was taken out and Sodom was, and the cities of the plain were all destroyed.
Right.
That was the precursor to the seven great Passovers. Now, the first great Passover was organised to take Israel out of Egypt, and that removal through to Sinai was the great Passover which commenced the sequence and liberation of Israel and establishment of Israel as the nation of God and the central cumulative system that will bring the whole world in and make them gods through the Passover system.
Right.
Now, because the Passover is part of the sequence of getting people made into Elohim, to have them become sons of God. So it's not isolated and it's not something past. It's part of the sequence all the way through to become gods.
Yeah, ongoing.
Yeah. But in the sequence, it's very interesting just to look at what's happening. There's the Passover in Egypt, number one,
Right.
and then we went through the Passover at Jericho, at Gilgal, when we circumcised Israel and then brought them. Took Jericho, marched around. Christ appeared to Joshua as the captain of the army of the Lord. He then, the same thing he said to Moses, take off your shoes, for where you are standing is holy ground.
Right.
And that's what Joshua had to do as well. And that sequence was the rolling away of the sins from Israel at Jericho, Gilgal. Right, which means the rolling.
Right.
Now, the next sequence through the Passovers, there are seven, and we go through from Gilgal, we go to Josiah's restoration and the great Passover. Every time Israel went astray and sinned, God raised up a prophet or a leader to restore them, and the process of the restoration was always done with the sanctification and then the Passover.
Right.
And that no restoration in Israel was made without this sanctification and restoration
Right. Yes.
through the Passover.
Through the correct calendar and the Jubilee system. and
Yes.
The first of Nisan Abib, and through the sanctification onto the
Yes.
fast of the simple and
Yes.
the erroneous and so forth.
Yes.
Right.
And that was indispensable to the rectification of Israel, the restoration to God, and you cannot be restored to God without keeping the Passover and the sanctification period through the first and to the 7th, and then the 7th to the 14th, and
On to
the 15th to
yeah.
the 21st, and on to
Yeah.
Pentecost.
Right, lovely.
So then you get through from Josiah's restoration. We then go to the fourth great Passover, which was Hezekiah's restoration. Hezekiah's was a great restoration because Manasseh had sinned greatly, his father, and
Manasseh, right.
it was in each of the restorations that cleansing was made difficult because they had become so polluted that the structure of the temple was corrupt, and that they had to restore and cleanse the temple. And in some cases, in Josiah and Hezekiah's situation, it took longer than the 14 days to the 14th of Abib, where they sacrificed the lamb.
Right.
That was set aside from the beginning, and it's under the law, and then you have to be outside of your gates under Deuteronomy 16 verses 5 to 8, and you have to be 3 times a year from Deuteronomy 16:16. So these things were all laid down thousands of years ago, and it wasn't a new system with Christ.
No, that's right.
Right? The Lord's Supper was established, but it had been written into the law 2,000 years before, 1,500 years before Christ was born.
Right.
So all these things are all planned according to God's plan of salvation. Now, from Hezekiah, we had the great restoration of the temple. It was cleansed, and they kept the Passover and a second Passover in some instances because they had to cleanse the whole temple's system.
And like you say, Wade, I mean, the process that Christ did through the Passover and the sanctification period had already been in before. He only went in and changed some of the symbolism to suit what was going on from that point on, didn't he?
Yes. He fulfilled and implemented the 14th Lord's Supper, which had been placed as part of the ccgDOTorg meal, and the first element of the Passover on the 14th.
Right.
Nobody really understood why. They knew they were going into on the 14th to take this first meal at the night of the 14th. They went in on the 13th. Night of the 14th, they took the ccgDOTorg meal, which wasn't the Passover meal, and that was a heresy taught by some of the churches of God in the 20th century. What they then did was on the 14th in the afternoon at 3 p.m, they then killed the Passover lambs.
And that's the time that Christ was executed,
Yes.
and therefore he didn't take the meal later on that day because he was already
He
dead.
eat himself, or he's dead.
But we go back now to the 6th Passover, which was Ezra. Now Ezra was dealing with the restoration of the house of God after they came back from the captivity of Babylon. And the Persians allowed them to re-establish the system and gave them basically the orders, the laws, the writs to let them go and send them back and give them the funds to rebuild the temple, which was the house of Eloah. Now in Ezra, when you look at from chapters 4 to chapter 7, Ezra talks about the house of Eloah. It's not the house of Elohim. It's not the house of Yahweh. It's not the house of anything else. It's the house of Eloah. Now, Eloah is the name of the one true God who is the Father. There is all of the Elohim were created by him, including Christ. They are all Elohim. And as a result of Eloah's creation of the Elohim, he became Ha-Elohim, or the God, which has a plural connotation incorporating all the sons of God as Elohim.
Yeah.
Now that's avoided like the plague by these mainstream Trinitarians, because they don't want to have the concept of Elohim, because Satan doesn't want us to become Elohim.
Right.
So understanding that is important.
Very.
And the satanic system has tried to convince everyone of the reverse.
And there's a term for that belief as well, called deism.
Ditheism.
Diatheism.
Yeah, ditheism.
Yeah.
That's the belief that there are two gods and no more.
Right. And they're both co-equal and have the same power.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But when you make the Elohim immortal and say they can't die, which is what one of the churches have got taught in the 20th century,
Right.
you are polytheist. What you're doing is creating multiple gods beyond the capacity of death as immortal beings.
Right. Well,
Now that's heresy,
Right.
utter polytheism,
Yes.
and polytheist heresy.
Yeah.
Now that's what the churches of God were doing in the 20th century, and that took them out of the
Right.
first resurrection.
The whole-
They don't get it
the
yet.
whole Doug Armstrong system.
Yes, they don't get it.
And they've still got it wrong now, don't they? The whole concept of their Passovers, because they're with an incorrect calendar, which we've spoken about before and we'll speak about again, has caused them to go into complete error, and therefore they're starting to lose, even though they say we know what's going on, they're starting to lose that knowledge, isn't it?
Yes, they don't have the capacity to retain and develop understanding because they're in contradiction to the law. So the structure of the seventh Passover with Christ was the culmination of this preparation to make us gods, and then we were given the Holy Spirit from Pentecost 30 CE, and that allowed us to go into the first resurrection. And that's a major development, and is the sequence of the seven great Passovers. Now there are other things mentioned in the paper, but we won't cover those. You just study the paper,
Yeah,
and that'll
look at
take
the
you
paper.
You
into
look at the
further-
paper, well, it's
further
explicit and
sequence.
it's all laid out.
Yeah, what we need though to understand, and everyone needs to understand, that you can't become an Elohim. You're not going to heaven, ever, for any reason, until after God comes down here. God's coming here. We're not going there. Now, once God comes down here, then we'll spread throughout the universe, and that we'll be given different tasks. But we only see through a glass darkly, as Paul said. We don't really understand fully the tasks we're going to be given. But in order to get us to become Elohim, we have to keep these Passovers and the sequence right through up until the first resurrection, and then the millennial system, and we'll go on for the 1,000 years in the millennium, keeping the whole of the structure of the law and the sequence of the calendar.
With
Once-
repetition, so we can all
Yes.
ingrain it and know it habitually,
Yes,
which they failed to do with all these introductions of antinomian falsehoods that just muddied the waters and confused the whole
yes,
lot.
that's good.